You've probably been there before. You need to give someone on your team feedback, and you are dreading it. Maybe their presentation missed the mark. Maybe they've been dominating conversations in meetings. Maybe their emails are a little too, let's say, creative with grammar. Whatever the issue, you know it's your job to say something. But giving criticism is not easy. Say too little, and your employee doesn't know what to fix. Say too much, and they shut down completely. Make it personal, and now you're not talking about a problem at work. You're talking about them, and that can be damaging to both the relationship and their performance. As a manager, your ability to deliver clear, constructive, and actionable feedback is one of the most important skills you can develop. So maybe it's time for a bit of feedback on feedback. So how do you shape the criticism that actually helps your team improve? How do you know when to deliver the feedback? And how do you give advice to people who absolutely do not want to hear it? Welcome to Manage This, a series for everyone playing manager in the middle. I'm your host, Mandy Gosling. Each episode, we help managers tackle everyday problems that seem to pop up when you're both leading a team and being managed in return. This is Feedback 101, Getting Constructive with Your Criticism. I had the opportunity to chat with Yeun Joon Kim, an associate professor at Cambridge University and an expert on feedback and creativity. And in his research, he repeatedly comes across a familiar tension. Managers and employees disagree over the most effective type of feedback.
Managers tend to believe that effective managers should give a lot of negative feedback. But employees actually think that effective managers are giving lots of positive feedback. So there is a huge inconsistency between managers and employees.
The result is that workplaces tend to be dominated by negative feedback since that's the managerial default. And this isn't great, since Joon's research also shows that negative feedback can be pretty detrimental to team performance. Also,
this is kind of an interesting phenomena showing that generally managers do not give negative feedback in a more effective way.
So, how can managers get better at delivering this type of information? Let's start with a definition. What is feedback anyways?
The definition of feedback refers to critical information regarding the gap between your current performance and performance standard. If the gap is closed, it means that your performance is sufficient. As a result, you're gonna get positive feedback. If the gap is wide open, then it means that your current performance is insufficient. As a result, you're gonna get negative feedback.
That gap between current performance and expected standards is the key element here. The feedback you provide basically helps your employees understand where they are, skills-wise, experience-wise, whatever, and where you and your organization expect them to be. It's a critical piece of information, and you don't want your employees guessing at it. In lots of organizations, closing that gap or exceeding company standards is key to professional development, compensation growth, and movement within an organization. And it's also an important motivator for personal improvement. It gives people a goal to orient their growth around.
By receiving feedback, you can have good understanding of your own strengths and limitations. Once you have some understanding of your strengths, you can decide whether you should further develop your strengths, particularly for those strengths important for your company.
There's a couple ways managers can really cause problems when it comes to providing feedback. The first is a lack of it in the first place.
If the manager is not providing anything, then the team as a whole may feel lost. They have no idea where they are going, and they have no idea how to coordinate each other at the team level. So they will have just no idea about whether they are doing good or bad.
If you don't want your team guessing and floundering, then you need to speak up and provide direction. Another major mistake is overly focusing on the negative.
My research showed that most of the negative feedback from managers to employee is negative for the employee's performance as well as team performance. For the individual, if you receive negative feedback, the main detrimental mechanism is that you feel threatened, right? You take the negative feedback personally. As a result, your motivation reduces and your performance declines. Team performance could suffer because other employees, they may have some vicarious learning. right? They may see that leaders' negative feedback, frequent negative feedback to a certain person as abusive behavior, right? And observing abusive behavior actually makes people feel that this organization or this team has negative sort of a climate or group characteristic, which in turn may have detrimental effects on the group processes and group's motivation, etc., which in turn may reduce team's performance.
Basically, when you're bad at providing feedback, and particularly when you're bad at just providing negative feedback, it creates a toxic culture where people expect to only hear negative things about their performance. And no one likes hearing that they get it wrong all the time. And okay, it's great for you to know that you need balance. Everything you tell your employee can't be all negative, but part of your job is to help your employee continually improve and grow. And positive reinforcement only goes so far, especially when there might be legitimate performance issues that your team member needs to work on. So how do you actually get better at providing that constructive feedback? Well, step one is actually committing to be more thoughtful and personalized with your feedback. And sorry, but Joon has no magic words to make this easier.
There is no magical tips, right? So you need to actually spend a lot of time crafting the feedback message and think about how to best deliver your feedback message for your employees.
It's not a rote exercise you can undertake. Each employee is different, and each employee needs to be approached in a way that works for that employee. So to that end, your first task is to sit down and identify if the employee you're providing feedback to is a high performer, low performer, or average. This is really important because it's going to shape step two. Once you've identified the type of employee you have, now you need to think through how you're going to deliver this feedback. You may have heard about the feedback sandwich. Put a piece of negative criticism between two pieces of praise. Well, it's time to toss that sandwich in the bin.
Simply speaking, a feedback sandwich did not work.
Joon's recent research shows that the type of performer you are, high, low, or average, changes the structure that works best.
For the high performers, what we found was that feedback message should start with negative comments, and then later on, it should be gradually positive and positive. So that structure was the most effective in terms of improving or further improving high performers' subsequent performance. If you provide opposite structure, like starting with positive things and then negative, then that was actually the worst feedback structure for the high performer. But for the low performers, interestingly, the beginning of the message was the most important. You need to begin with positive message and then gradually pointing out some weaknesses of the recipient. But for the average performer, interestingly, the beginning of the feedback message was not that important. But what we found was that the message should become increasingly negative. So that structure was particularly beneficial for average performers.
These are subtle differences. High performers need to hear that negative messaging first. Average performers don't really care about the positive message at the top, but will focus on the negative comments afterwards. And low performers need that positive messaging at the top to be able to listen to the negative feedback that follows. How you position that feedback, what you're comparing that baseline to, matters as well.
So social comparison, everybody know, right? Basically, in the social comparison method, organizations compare focal employees with their peers, right? It can show your relative standing in terms of your performance, right? And this is really typical method a lot of companies are using. But there are some companies adopting temporal comparison as well. A temporal comparison method only compares your current performance with your previous performance.
Feedback for your superstars works best when you're comparing them to their peers.
If the target already performs really well, social comparison feedback is definitely more effective because for high performers, receiving social comparison feedback reinforces their superior standing in the team, which in turn may motivate them to invest even more efforts in their work.
This absolutely does not work for low performers.
If you give a social comparison feedback to the lower performers, it significantly demotivate those low performers, which in turn reduce their performance. If the low performers receive temporal feedback, well, this feedback can direct their attention toward gradual improvement of their performance, or bit by bit.
Being compared to all the superstars can make improvement feel totally out of reach. So instead, help the low performers focus on that incremental growth. Step 3 is to think about timing. The current prevalent school of thought is that immediate feedback is best, but Joon cautions that the research into this area is really light, and that some of the studies that do exist show that immediate feedback can be harmful.
One study actually showed that immediate feedback on people's driving style was actually detrimental to their driving performance.
Instead, he says you need to think about the type of organization you work in and the type of job it is.
So my suggestion is that immediate feedback can be adopted in the situation where immediate feedback or close monitoring is sort of a kind of part of no. Think about a manufacturing line. Everybody knows that the company is watching you because the company should make sure that you are not making errors. If you made error, you should remove that sort of product, right, from the manufacturing line. So employees generally have some consensus that there should be some monitoring system.
If you're the type of company or in the type of job where mistakes need to be closely monitored and prevented, like the factory line job, or say you're working in a newsroom where spelling or fact errors need to be caught immediately, or an accounting team where accuracy is the name of the game, then immediate feedback is more baked into the culture and it's easier to swallow. The second situation where immediate feedback is generally a positive thing is when your employee or yourself is in training, either new to the industry, job, or career.
This is the setting where close monitoring is to some degree allowed, and people understand that it's necessary. So in that situation, you can provide immediate feedback, and then the trainees can take immediate corrective actions to improve their subsequent performance.
And finally, immediate feedback is always going to be important when there are certain ethical or safety concerns. You don't want to sit on a piece of criticism if it's going to get someone hurt. Otherwise, Joon says feedback can generally be handed out later. That formal twice-a-year review structure lots of companies use isn't a bad place to deliver feedback. But with a lack of research into delaying criticism, he says just to use your best judgment. Don't wait too long that your feedback feels out of place, but not so immediate that it feels disruptive or disheartening. Step 4 of improving your feedback game really is to keep things from getting personal. If the feedback's around how an employee approaches tasks or the need to develop certain skills, keep the attention there.
You need to focus on the task rather than a person, right? Everybody knows. If your negative feedback focus on person, then obviously the recipient will take it personally.
Like we said earlier, when people feel personally attacked, they lose motivation to change, or even motivation to perform at all. If someone needs to improve their communication skills, don't just tell them they're a terrible communicator or are bad at explaining things clearly. Focus instead on specific things they need to do to improve. Hey, Sue, on that call with the client yesterday, I noticed some of the timeline details got a bit lost and might have created some confusion. Can you work to break that information into smaller chunks next time? Or, in your last email, the key message you wanted to deliver about budgets kind of got buried in the middle. Can you bring that information, like the key messages, to the top of the email going forward to make it easier for people to respond? Even if you have to talk to someone about something that's more personality or behavior-based, maybe they're the negative Nancys and they're bringing the whole team down, you should still focus on the task or the behavior they're displaying.
For example, you can say, I observed that you behaved in this way to a certain person. I think this is kind of a problematic. This is the reason why, right? So really focusing on a certain behavior in a given situation, this is very important. And this is why goal setting theory also argues that the feedback should be very specific rather than broad.
Basically, you're not saying, hey, Nancy, your bad attitude towards this project's bringing everyone down. Instead, you're saying, hey, Nancy, the way you brought up concerns in yesterday's meeting about the project left others hesitant to move forward. I'd ask that you bring those issues up with me directly, and then we can work through what's important to bring to the whole group going forward. So what do you do when someone is bad at receiving feedback? That's a challenge.
If a person is not willing to take advice or feedback, then frankly speaking, it's almost impossible to make that person be open to the criticism. But still, as a manager, you need to lead the team and you need to help the person perform better and better.
It's tough. You need to provide direction or opportunity for growth, and Jim just isn't buying it. Here are a couple things you can try. First, Joon says you can actually try and give them more challenging problems.
Something you can think of is self-feedback, right? In that case, you can actually create a situation where the person can identify his or her weaknesses for themselves. For example, there is a research showing that these researchers investigated R&D workers, particularly software engineers, and the managers also identified some employees disliking feedback exchanges, right? So in that case, the managers actually provided more challenging tasks so that that person can self-generate a negative feedback through the challenging work. Usually, if you have challenging work, you become more curious about how to complete this kind of task, right? And you become more open to the criticism or potential advice from your supervisor.
Basically, when someone's faced with a challenge, they will hopefully reflect on the skills they might be lacking to complete the project, making them more likely to seek out feedback in the process. This obviously isn't going to work for every situation or even every type of job, but it's an interesting concept. The second option is to really kill them with positivity, figuratively.
For those people who are not willing to take advice, you can rather focus on their strengths, or if they have some success experience, then you can jointly reflect on how that person could become successful on a certain project, for example, right? So just focusing on the positive side and then make it even stronger would be also helpful.
Remember, Joon's research shows that employees believe positive feedback is the key for productivity and growth. So when someone is super unwilling to listen to criticism, constructive or otherwise, then leaning into everything they did right and nudging them towards the change you want to see is your best option. Finally, what do you do when you need to give your boss feedback? Well, good news!
According to my research, by the way, managers can actually deal with negative feedback much better than employees. They already know that employees' feedback cannot change their organizational life, right? But whereas employees, if they receive negative feedback from the manager, they become worried about their future.
They aren't likely to lose their jobs if you need to provide some constructive criticism, so they tend to be more receptive to it. So if you need to approach your boss, the earlier suggestions still apply. But be real about the type of organization you work in. While you might want to give feedback, and technically, Joon's research shows managers are better at receiving negative feedback than employees. If you work somewhere that doesn't encourage that kind of exchange, or your boss or superior doesn't create a psychologically safe workplace, tread carefully. This is also a really great opportunity for you to think about the environment you're creating for your team. Do they come to you with suggestions or advice on how to manage them better? Do you think they feel psychologically safe enough to share their negative views? Are there other challenges you want us to tackle in future videos? Do you have any feedback on this series? Drop a line in the comments and consider subscribing to this series, our whole YouTube channel, or the Rotman Insights Hub. Just click on the link in the description to get more thought leadership and research-backed management tips from the Rotman community delivered to your inbox every other week. Thanks for watching.